Everybody, my name's Fiona McPherson and I'll be hosting this evening's event. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Open University to this evening's webinar on happiness at work. On today's session we have Janet from the Open University who's working tirelessly in the background, and also Jessica Pryce-Jones, who likes to be known as Jess by the way, who is presenting on behalf of Career Farm. Just before we start, I'd like you to familiarise yourself with WebEx if you haven't used it before. I know I'm sure quite a few of you have. We've done quite a lot of these sessions, but if you haven't, I'm just going to give you a bit of tour of the screen. As you can see, the main part of the screen displays any content, so at the moment you can see the presentation. And I'm going to move it on so you can actually see myself and Jess, so we're not completely virtual, you've no idea who's talking. And we'll also show content on here such as videos, etc. At the top of your screen you'll see you've got an audio broadcast box, and this is where you can adjust the volume. And then on the right hand side of your screen you've got a number of tabs, and we're going to be using the participant tab and the Q&A tab today. So we're just going to have a quick practice just so you familiarise yourself with how you will use those. So first of all, if you take a look at the participant panel and select it if you've not already done so, and you will see there's some icons and there's a show hand icon. So first of all, if you just go down and click on the show hand icon, fantastic. That's great. So at some point, I don't think Jess is going to do this, but at some point you might be asked, she might just ask for a show of hands on a particular question, but that's great. Okay, and now what we're going to have a look at is the tick icon. If you click on the tick icon, you'll see there's a drop-down menu on there. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to answer the following question with either a yes or a no. Have you attended a webinar before? Okay, that's great. So some of you have, and we have some new people, so it's a new experience for you, so that's good. So I hope you actually enjoy the experience. Now we're going to look at the Q&A panel. We have allowed about 15 minutes at the end of the session for Jess to take questions, but for any reason you just need clarification on a point as we go along. If you want to send a question through to myself, then I can put that to Jess in the session, but otherwise if you want to just questions towards the end, and we'll do a question and answer session at that point. So we're just going to have a practice just so that you actually use the Q&A panel. So to send a question, if you can select my name, or it might say panelist, you click on the Ask drop-down menu on the Q&A panel. Okay, and normally what you do is type in your answer and click send, and we'll answer them as many as we can. But for a quick practice, if you just want to type in there whereabouts you are geographically today and click on send. Okay, Jeff's in Portsmouth, we've got Roger in Oxford, we've got Carmen who's put test, we've got Kitty in Winchester, Jane in Milan, Stuart in London, Heidi in Italy, so we've got a real cross-section of people. So that's how you will submit a question. Okay, and then essentially we've got Chicago as well, we've got people all over. At the end of the session there is a short feedback questionnaire which will pop up, and we'd really appreciate you just taking a couple of minutes just to let us know your feedback and your thoughts on today's session. So now I'm going to pass you over to our presenter, so she can introduce herself. So just bear with me a second. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jess.
Great. So have I got control of the screen now?
You have.
I have. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for dialing in tonight on what in Oxford is a cold and miserable evening. I'm hoping it's nicer elsewhere. So thank you very much for being here. My name's Jessica Pryce-Jones. As Fiona said, do call me Jess. And I've been working on the science of happiness at work since 2005. And it all came about because I was running around the world doing a global rollout for a very large IT company, and I was making everyone miserable, frankly. It was a very unhappy making experience, going and making management teams really, really angry. And I thought there's got to be a better way of doing it. And so I went to the literature, and there wasn't anything there, and that was the beginning of my journey. My background is that I am a psychologist, and I've been running eye-opener, which is both a learning and development business and an OD business. And this is where the OD work really fits in to this, the science of happiness at work, and how do we drive organizations so that people really are treated and behave as if they are the most important assets, which they are, because everybody says they are, but very few people behave like that. So if I just move on, I'm going to start with a poll. And I want to ask you all, are you happier at work now than you were 3 years ago? So yes, no, or doesn't apply because maybe you weren't at work 3 years ago. So if you could have a little click on that, that would be fantastic. So while you're clicking away, Fiona, do I get to see the results? Well, I'm not seeing any results at the moment. So
Sorry, no, they're still going. I was just unmuting my microphone.
Okay.
Just waiting for a couple of people who haven't actually started yet. We've got two very bashful people who haven't actually said yes or no.
Two very bashful people. So what have we got?
Okay.
Have we got results?
We have. Just bear with me a second and we shall show the results.
So that looks like kind of yes and no. So some of you are and some of you are not. And I'm sure that the people who are happier at work now, it's because you've got a lot of the stuff that we know makes you happy at work. So you've got clear goals, you're learning things, you feel you're achieving your potential, you like your colleagues, you've got values that fit with your workplace, you're confident in what you do, you're not stressed by what you do, but you've got the right amount of stress and challenge. So those are some of the things that we know make us happy at work, and obviously the corollary is what makes us unhappy. So we're hardwired for hard times, and we're very aware of the things that make us unhappy, but we're less aware of the things that make us happy. So I just think it's interesting now and again, because we know that happiness is a mindset, to stand back and say, okay, what's actually going on for me? And the object of this presentation, the objective, is to think about what serves you as an individual and helps you as a team leader as well. So that's what I'd like to leave you with overall. And in order to do that, I'm going to explain a little bit about what we do and what we actually mean when we talk about happiness at work, because this phrase is bandied about, and it doesn't mean, yoo-hoo, I'm having a wonderful time. Of course that's important, and it tells you you're on the right track. Keep going, do this thing. But it's not what we're talking about. I want to say a little bit about the proposition that we're talking about this evening, and what our research tells us, that you've got some understanding of what that is in order that we work out the business case, and I'll show you how that works. And then explain some of the analytics that we use and how we use the research, and finally offer you some tools, just tools and tips that things you can use for yourself and for your teams going forward, and then I'll share with you a few slides and show you how we work with teams and organizations. And then I've got an offer for you at the end. For those of you who want to stay in, I'm going to be giving away some books, and I'll tell you how you can get one for yourself. So that's the inducement to stay with me to the bitter end. So a little bit about what we do. We are really focused on analytics. My background is in financial services. I'm often thought that organizations, they know where the numbers are all the time. But actually, we don't know what's happening with people all the time. And wouldn't it be really interesting if we could start to properly measure how people are feeling and perceiving and what they're thinking in order to help drive our organisations. And so we're very focused on analytics in order to do leadership team and OD work. And we do that work ourselves and we license it. So back to what we mean when I'm talking about happiness at work. As I said, those little short-term highs, they're important. They tell you to keep going. Mindset happiness, though, is the thing we're actually talking about here. We're talking about mindset happiness because your mindset is relatively stable. We tend to jump out of bed, feel the same kind of things as long as we've slept, okay? Do the same kind of things. And unless we actively start challenging our mindsets, we'll stay the same. We'll just keep on doing what we've always done. But we know that our mindsets are sensitive to change, and we know that they affect behavior because there's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy that tells us that, 20 years work, that the individual is very capable of doing things differently, should we choose to. Now, trait happiness is very important. Now, trait is your personality, what you're born with. And it's always more fun working with an optimist than with a pessimist. Well, I'm not really talking about that because that's more stable. It's harder to manipulate. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the thing that you can do something about, which is your mindset, your attitude, and how you go about doing things. So that's one thing I'd like to define right up front. So it's not this happy clappy stuff. Happy clappy helps, but normally the happy clappies goes along with, whoa, wow, we got the deal, I'm feeling fantastic. Or, yes, I got the job. And that's followed about 8 to 10 seconds afterwards with, oh my goodness, now I'm going to have to do the job or execute on this deal or whatever it is. So that's very, very short term. But what we're talking about is this kind of stable feeling, relatively good, because that relatively good has a huge host of positive outcomes. So when we're talking about happiness at work, we're talking about this mindset because it enables action that maximizes your performance and helps you and others to achieve their potential. That's what we really mean when we're talking about happiness at work. So here's the A to X of our clients, and I always think the client list is rather dull, so I'm going to move swiftly on. And if you want to see that yourself, do go and look at our website. It can tell you more. But the clients come to us because, probably like you, they're facing very common and complex workplace issues. And so if you see some of these things, do send us a chat message saying, yes, I'm facing that thing. So this is a typical issue that organizations and people facing, leaders are facing right now. So how do I push performance without pain? Because the pain bit is very prevalent and has a very, very negative effect. It's how do I help people cope with all this pressure? Because the pressure is starting to make people ill. We can't recruit, we've got a headcount freeze, and yet we've got to deliver more. We've got to execute on big change, and we don't have any new resources. Our talent, and particularly our Gen Y, we're worried about. And by the way, we're seeing in our data that Gen Y is starting to go to Tier 2 in organizations rather than take the pain of working in a Tier 1 organization, especially in professional services. Downsizing and still delivering. How do we actually get to grips with what our culture is and move it on to something more positive? How do we work out the ROI on people? How are we more creative? How can people help me grow? How do we get teams and leaders and everybody to up their game? So these are some of the common and complex issues that lots and lots of people are working with today and looking for how do we just find another lens to tackle these issues. And so my suggestion to you is that dealing with individual and with team happiness at work is a great way of going about that. I'm pushing leaders to our next level, which I think I mentioned. So this is where we are and where we work. Red and blue dots. Oh, look, some of them have slipped. That's interesting. The South African one should definitely be in South Africa, and Singapore should be there. Australia as well seems to have fallen off the map, but never mind about that. And moving on, I'd like to talk now about our research. So what does our research actually tell us, and how do we know what we know? Well, after 2005, when I'd had this experience of creating very unhappy organizations, I thought we've got to do something differently. But what is happiness at work? What does it mean? Because there wasn't anything in the literature. And when you're studying emotion now, the best practice way of going about it is not to look in the literature and say, okay, what does everybody else say? But to go and talk to people about what their experience of this thing is. So we went and we ran 14 focus groups with a protocol. And I wasn't allowed to do that because if you think that you might find an outcome as you're doing research, you probably will find that outcome. There's well-known experimenter effect. So I didn't run any of those focus groups. And we backed them up then with 67 interviews. And we did these interviews because after the focus groups, people would say, oh, I didn't want to say this in front of everybody, but. So we ran the same protocol with individuals. And out of that, we pulled 77 themes. And we put the 77 themes then into a questionnaire. And that was incredibly painstaking because if you've got 77 themes, you need to develop a questionnaire if you're doing it in a really robust way. You need to ask the same question 3 times, and you need to collect demographic data. So welcome to a questionnaire of over 300 questions, which took 6 months to get nearly 200 of them, and we must have printed about 2,000 of them to get them done. So that was a real labor to find out, was there anything in this happiness at work stuff? And it was clear that we started to have one total factor. We started to have something that was coming out of the data. And so we replicated it in a second study to see, okay, how do we refine this? And we got 403 respondents, and we could throw out then a huge ton of questions. And we did the same then, again, repeated the process again in study 3. And we had altogether nearly 2,000 respondents. And out of that, we got to 24 versions of our questionnaire because you're always refining the questions and working out how could you word them slightly better and running little side studies. So we're at version 24. We ran validity and reliability in order to check, have we got something that really works? And that's what best practice tells you you need to do, to get an instrument that is actually going to tell you something useful. Now we've got 30,000 respondents in our database, and we're getting some really clear understanding of what happiness at work means for individuals, for teams, and for organizations. And we've also got a lot of cross-cultural data, which I think is really fascinating. We know, for example, and we're about to cut the data again, that if you want to be happiest at work, you can go and be a Dutch consultant, or go and work in Australia, pretty much in any industry. But don't go and be an Italian banker, because that really won't make you happy at work, and the Greeks are even worse. And then you might say, well, that's no surprise. But what is interesting is when you look at the overall trends, because we can see, for example, that America is coming 10th in the league table, while Australia is coming first. The Chinese are coming after the Americans, but India and Pakistan are coming extremely high. So that tells you something about the working culture in the large kind of organizations that we tend to go and work with. And we've also got all levels of seniority. Now, there is something interesting to say about that, because the more senior you are, the more you tend to be happy at work. And that's because you've got so much more control over what you do. So seniority is directly correlated with being happier at work. So how do we know what we know? And what is the fundamental consulting tool that we use based around, and how do we talk about it? Well, having looked at those 2,000 respondents, nearly 2,000 that we got in study 3, what we then did was we looked at the data, and I'm going to show you a bit of a complicated thing here, but you can see that the data, as it comes out, it clusters into 5 groups. So you can see 5 steps. So you've got under number 1, that little number 1, you've got one load of data with kind of 0.979, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things there. And then you've got another load of data under 0.2 and 0.3 and 0.4 and 0.5. So you've got those 5 clusters, those 5 groups. And the way those 5 things stick together is what gives us our performance happiness model. So the first group we call contribution. And contribution is all about what you do. Conviction is your short-term motivation, the second of the 5 C's. Culture, in the middle, is your feeling of fit at work. Commitment is your long-term engagement, both with what you're doing and your organization. And confidence is what it says on the tin. And around the outside, you can see we've got trust, and that's in your organisation, pride in your organisation, and recognition from your organisation. And lying at the centre, you've got achieving your potential. And these things all work as an ecosystem. So you can take a little bit of stress in it. So let's imagine that under contribution, you don't feel you're achieving your goals. You've got one of those 8 items in there that you don't feel is really working for you. That's fine if you don't feel you're achieving your goals, as long as you also feel that in that you've got reasonably clear objectives and you can work to those, that you can raise issues and talk about them, that you get positive feedback, that you feel secure, that you feel listened to, so that the other things are working. But if all that isn't working, it really upsets the ecosystem. So if you can't contribute at your best and do what you're there to do, what happens then is you start to feel less motivated. So your conviction goes down, your short-term motivation goes down. And the minute that your motivation goes down and you're not doing what you can do really well, your confidence starts to go. And when your confidence starts to go, you start to think, well, am I in the right culture for me? And at that point, your commitment's gone when you say it's not. So that's how this kind of ecosystem works together, and either helps or it hinders people from being happy at work and performing really well. And we're really for happiness at work, not just because we want people to be happy, because it is so directly affected. It so directly affects performance, and that is the main thing. So let's just have another little poll here, and let me ask you, what percentage of your time do you think you're happy at work? So if you could just click on the thing that works best for you. So are you 20% of your time happy at work? Are you 21 to 35%? Are you just kind of half the time happy at work? Above half? Or tending towards the, wow, I'm super happy at work a lot of the time? Fiona,
Just
are you
waiting
there?
I am here. We're just waiting for a few people just to finish.
Have a click.
We've got some undecided people. We've got 4 shy ones this time. Oh no, 3 shy people. Come on, you last 3.
It's sometimes hard. You want to have a bit of reflect on.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Okay, I think those 3 shy people are staying shy, so we will close this one and I'll give you the results.
Okay, so we're doing pretty well here. So we've got 36 to 50, 51 to 65. Now, I'd like you just to look at that, because that is a normal distribution pretty much. We've got 10% though on F who are feeling really pretty happy at work. 81 to 100% of the time they're happy at work, so 3 of you. But if you look at the shape of that, that's a normal distribution, because it's got many more responses in the middle. And I just want you to hang on to the idea of a normal distribution, which is skinny at both extreme ends and bunches up in the middle, so you get more data there. Because that's fundamental to how we look at our data. So, well done those of you who are having a better time, and if anybody wants to contact me afterwards to talk about the things that are making them less happy at work, do feel free to ping me an email, and I'll let you know how to. So getting back into, so what does this mean? Well, when we look at the business case for why it pays to be happy at work, what we're doing is comparing the people who are least happy at work to the people who are happiest at work. And saying, okay, what's the difference between one end of the data and the other, just as we've done with you guys. And this is what we see. When we compare one end of the scale to the other, people who are happiest at work are going to stay in their jobs for 60 months, whereas people who are unhappiest at work, that's about 17 months right now. And that's gone up since recession. Before recession, it was 3 to 6 months. During this recession, it went from 6 to 12 months. Post the first recession, it went to 12 months, and now it's creeping up again in our data. So that's worth thinking about, because it means that it's very difficult, and lots of you will have seen this in your workplace, it's difficult to move. So you're unhappy at work, and it's tough to move. And that's very, very hard, because what happens, we know that unhappiness is spread to 3 degrees in a social network. what that means is that if I'm a real cow and I meet with Fiona and I'm miserable to Fiona, Fiona will go away and pass that on to Janet, and Janet will go away and pass that on to someone else. So what you're doing by retaining people who are happy at work or not fixing that issue is spreading the misery in social networks. And when I say social networks, I mean real face-to-face relationships that people have. This isn't Facebook stuff. This is the real relationships that impact all of us at work. So people who are unhappy at work are going to be there for longer than they were, and they're going to be passing that unhappiness on. On sick leave, just a quick snapshot in the data here, people who are unhappiest at work are taking 7 days off a year sick, and people who are happiest are taking about 3/4 of a day, which means they're struggling in to do something, and then they're going home. So 3/4 of a day isn't a real day, is it? So it's they're making a big effort to still do stuff. But it also means that they're not getting so ill. And we know that when you're unhappier, you're more prone to colds. And that's just a piece of research that's been out there since the 70s. We're more prone to get ill when we're unhappy. Our cortisol levels are higher and therefore more vulnerable to viruses. So we know that people who are unhappier are sicker. And by the way, we took public sector data out of that because it was really contaminating the database. Public sector data is much, much higher. So that's the second reason for why we might want to think about keeping people happy in their workplace. And here's another one. Now, this is a measure that we're always looking at. It's focus on task. We ask people, what percentage of the time are you happy at work? And what percentage of the time do you focus on task? And what we can see is that people who tell us that they're happiest at work tell us that they're focusing on task. It's 80% of the time. 80% of the time is 4 days a week. People who are unhappiest at work are focusing on task 40% of the time. Now, 40, 80%, that's 2 days a week, 4 days a week. And I thought those figures looked really, really way too round. But we've been in and checked them 2 or 3 times, and they have changed. 3 years ago, people who were unhappiest at work were focusing on task 51% of the time. That's an extra half day a week. 50% of the time is 2.5 days a week. It's gone down to 40. And in fact, it's gone down for everybody except the people who are happiest at work. So it seems to be that whatever you chuck at people who are really happy at work, they deal with it and they stay there. But group 4 is now showing at group 3 at group 2 to group 1, and group 1 has dropped off. So what that means is that everybody's performance has pretty much dropped off by 10 to 11% over the past 3 years. And I think that tells you a lot in terms of output. You know, what is our output? It's not surprising that it's not what it used to be.
Jess, just before you move on, I've just had a quick question from Peter, just asking, why is public sector sickness greater?
Quite often, public sector sickness, it's bundled into a contract, and it's then seen, it becomes a standard cultural norm to take that time off. People aren't really sick in many cases, but it's a cultural norm that you take that time off because it's a right. And so, for example, I think in the Met standard sick leave, average sick leave is 28 days. I just don't believe that everybody in the Met is ill 28 days a year. But it becomes a cultural norm that that's what you do. It is the first thing. But I think the second thing is, in quite a lot of public sector jobs, there's much less control. And we know that if you have less control, you're more vulnerable to sickness. And so it's not actual control itself, but it's a perception of control. And that's something as a leader that is enormously important. Because even if you, and here's a tip, like top tip for you as an individual and as a leader of teams, help people have a perception of as much control as you can. Lack of sense of control has the same effect as smoking, and actually reduces life expectancy by about 10 years. And the Whitehall 2 studies tell us that. And in the Whitehall 2 studies, what happened was 10,000 civil servants were followed for about 10 years. And the hypothesis was that if you had a lot of responsibility, you would probably get more stress and have more heart attacks. But what they found was that it was in fact the admin staff who were much more stressed, more sick, and had more time off and suffered from more heart disease, because they had much, much less control. So how do you help people have a greater sense of control? One of the simplest things to do is to talk about what they have to do and say, right, you do the to-do list in the order of priority that you think most important, and then let's discuss it. And that is such a simple way of encouraging control. So I'm going to go back into my Prezi now. Sorry for diverting out there. But if you've got any more questions about it, do ask. And I want to talk next about one other outcome that we're always looking at. When we compare the happiest employees with their least happy colleagues, what we see is a sense of energy, feeling energized. And I'm sure you've all had your energy vampires sucking it all out of you. They consume such a lot of our own energy when we have to work with them. So people who are happiest at work are often very energized by what they're doing, and it looks like it's kind of 78% of their time versus 13% in people who are really unhappy at work. It's incredibly difficult to stay energized when you don't enjoy what you're doing. So as my colleague Simon says, who heads up our research, he says, Jess, the psychology is often the study of the bloody obvious, but actually what we've done is given the bloody obvious some really interesting numbers. And it's, I think, the numbers that tell such a powerful story. So moving on to the sixth bit of our presentation, how do we actually use all this stuff? Well, what we've done is compile it into a personal report. And if anybody wants to do a personal report and would like to just experience this thing, please do just send me an email at the end, and I'm delighted to offer you a trial, and just send me an email saying I'd like to do my own report, and we'll just release it to you. And what you can see is that funny little pentagon at the bottom. That's how we talk about the 5 C's. Then you've got this little triangle on the right-hand side, which looks at trust, recognition, and pride. And just to say one more thing about the 5 C's inside the pentagon, and trust, recognition, and pride. But the 5 C's is really how we operationalize happiness at work. It's how does this thing show up. But trust, recognition, and pride really create the context. And so that I'm not talking pure gobbledygook, here's an example. I have a great mate called Patty, and Patty was offered the job that she'd always wanted. But it was with an organisation whose fast food products I'm sure you've always eaten. At least I know that I enjoy them. And she was given this job in Switzerland, tax-free, kids' education paid for, everything she always wanted. And she said to me, Jess, I just can't take the job because I can't feel proud. When I'm thinking about my email that I'll be patty.x at this large fast food company.com, so I just won't feel good about it. I can't do the job. I won't feel sense of pride in working there. And that was absolutely right. If you can't feel really proud of what you do, it's really difficult to give it your best. If you don't trust the leaders of an organisation, how will you give it your best? So that's how we see these things working together. And let's just go into that in a bit more detail. So I've got the core of an individual report here. This is the COO of a healthcare organisation. And if you look at the pentagon first, you can see contribution being about what you do, conviction is your short-term motivation, culture is your feeling of fit again, commitment is your long-term engagement with what you're doing, and confidence is confidence. So when the little round dots, which represent this individual, are on the outside of the shaded area, so let's look at commitment. When you've got the dot there on the outside, you can see commitment is really strong because that grey shaded area is 50% of our baseline of the database. It's not obviously the whole area because otherwise we get the whole thing shaded, the whole of the pentagon would be shaded. So you can see that this guy is super committed to what he's doing. Culture, he's all right with the culture, but his motivation is struggling under conviction. He's on average in terms of contribution, and he's really not confident. So if I tell you he's working inside the NHS, this will be no surprise. Let's go back into trust, recognition, and pride. He gets a lot of recognition, He's an amazing, his background is as a neurosurgeon, and he does a lot of teaching work on top of running this. But you can see trust in his part of his organisation, and pride in it is not there. And so this would be something, I think, again, hello, rocket science, tell us something new. But what it does is it gives you a language and a way of tackling something which is quite difficult otherwise to put into words. And so my experience of working with this is that the utility is in the language and bringing something to the surface which otherwise might be quite difficult to do. So that's kind of the core of it. And now what I want to do is share some tools with you and see how we use this stuff. So contributions, I explained before, we've got goals, objectives, raising issues, feeling secure, being listened to, etc. in there. And those items are all really important. I want to say something about being listened to, because that was one of the most surprising things we found in our data. The impact of, or the correlation between being happy at work and being listened to is 0.69. That is a phenomenally high correlation. And when I first saw that piece, a perfect correlation is 1, and you're happy in social sciences when you get a correlation of kind of 0.35. So to get a correlation of 0.69 is phenomenally high. What does that say? It says listen to people. And I'm sorry to be so dull. And when I looked at that, I thought, oh my God, I can't write a book about listening. But actually, I think it's not listening. Listening signifies a lot more than the listening itself. It signifies a connection. It signifies belonging. It signifies acceptance. So I think it's the act it's not the act itself, it's the significance of the act which matters so much. So again, top tip, just take 10 minutes to really listen and tune out your own stuff to listen to what some of your colleagues might be saying to you. And by the way, the difference between positive feedback and appreciation is this. Positive feedback is task-oriented, but being appreciated is it's person-oriented. So that's the difference between the two. So another little tool for you, and we're going to talk about conviction. As we talked about contribution, talk about conviction. We've got these things here in, these are the items that make up conviction. We've got motivation, feeling efficient, effective, resilient, and a positive effect, having a positive effect on the world. What we're seeing in the data right now is that people are pretty resilient. We are much tougher than we ever know of ourselves. And we find that out when we have to deal with difficult things. And by the way, we never learn and grow without doing difficult stuff. So overcoming challenges, which comes into achieving your potential, it is super important. And if you're a team leader, you'll find that, and you'll know this from your experience, people don't like being given challenges. They rail and strain against it. But what they love is having done it. So they may dislike you while you're saying, here's your new challenge, but actually they like having done it because that's how we achieve our potential. We can't do it in any other way. But just going back into the data, what we're seeing right now is that people feel efficient, but they don't feel effective. So we're running around doing a lot of stuff, but we don't seem to feel that we're getting anywhere with it. So key tip would be to ask people, what would it take for you to feel really effective in what you're doing? And to work on that. So another thing to set people up for feeling and being effective, I was going to tell you a little story about Evan Davis. And you can imagine that one of the scariest interviews I ever did, was with Evan Davis, because he's so sharp and quick. And we did this little TV interview. And when you do a tele interview, I didn't know this, you get asked all the questions, and then you have to spin around and swap places, and you ask the questions again, so they can film the TV presenter asking the questions. So we've done all these questions, and halfway through, Evan asked me a question, and I completely lost my train of thought. And in fact, it was about achieving your potential. So he asked me this question. I completely lost my train of thought, and I went, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I can't remember what I was saying. And he said, don't worry. And then he said, oh, I can't remember what you were saying either. And we asked the editor, and the editor couldn't remember what I'd been saying. Luckily, this wasn't live. And the cameraman couldn't remember, nor could the sound recorders. Okay, fine, we start again. And I was quite embarrassed and quite flustered by this. And afterwards, when we were doing the reverse questions, I said to Evan, look, I'm so sorry that I just forgot. I feel really embarrassed about myself. And he said, no, don't worry. And then he told me this story when he'd been at Cambridge, and at the college he was at, in the last week of term, he was asked to say the grace in Latin. And he said the grace in Latin, and it wasn't very long, and halfway through he forgot what he was going to say. And he just couldn't get the words out. And he told me this story. And what was really interesting is that then Evan couldn't remember and got stuck on the questions that he was going to ask me because he had primed himself for failure. He tapped back into a time when he couldn't remember, and that's exactly what his brain was doing again. So when I'm talking about changing mindset, it's about changing mindset helpfully in order that you are effective. And so that's why it's really good to get people to talk about when they are effective and what it would take to do that, and go back to a time when they were, rather than focus on a time when they're not. Because if you focus on what you don't have, you get stuck in what you haven't got. So that's another tip for you as an individual and as a leader. So I want to talk a bit about culture now. And before we get into that, let's just have another quick poll. So what matters more to you right now? Is it liking your colleagues? Is it learning new stuff? Is it the money? Is it getting things done, overcoming challenges, or being in tune with your organization's values? So let's just have a quick poll.
Okay, I've got a couple of minutes to do this. I thought it might take some time to answer. Halfway there.
32 seconds in. So any other questions that come up while we're polling?
Just bear with me a second. We have got a question actually. Just let me go back into the questions. We have a question from Hector, who's just asking, how would you compare the happy employees with engaged employees? Do you see a difference in terms?
Yeah. Shall I answer that now?
Yes.
Okay, so what's interesting, obviously there's a crossover between happiness and engagement, but we're seeing quite interesting stuff in this. We're seeing people who tell us that they're very engaged at work, but they're not very happy. Because if you've got a great sense of ambition and duty and diligence, you will work very hard. You will do long hours. You may be engaged with what you're doing, but it doesn't make you happy. So we see that particularly amongst general managers and senior leader level. So that is a really interesting effect in our data. And what we're hypothesizing, we don't know this because we haven't looked at it yet, that we don't talk about engagement, we talk about engaged behaviors, because I can tell engaged behavior, but I can't really tell engagement because it's a state of being. So what we hypothesize at the moment is that happiness is part of the personal resources that you bring that drive engaged behavior. And that's the outcome that you see. The problem with a lot of engagement studies is that you're engaged, therefore you're engaged. So, where does it begin? And there's some very, very nice work by Sonia Lyubomirsky, which says, what comes first? Does happiness drive career success? And the answer seems to be yes. So the happiness bit comes first, the engaged bit comes second. And obviously, there is a little bit of what's called bidirectional. One thing affects the other. But I think just think back to a time when you were feeling particularly unhappy. Now, how efficient and effective, resilient and motivated were you? How engaged were you? So on a practical kind of practitioner sense, experiential sense, I think that makes sense. Hector, what do you think? Send us a comment. So here we go. We've got the poll answer. So people like learning. Yes, we love learning. We get really, really high data on loving learning. because, again, that contributes to our sense of achieving a potential. Pay is interesting, and I'm wondering how old you all are on this call, because pay seems to matter till you're about 32, and then at 32 it's like cut off, right, okay, I've had some hard life lessons, I've got a few life knocks, I know that money doesn't make an enormous difference, but it does seem to matter outside work, it matters less inside work, because I guess we don't have the opportunity to spend it so much. What's interesting, though, is recognition and money, and there's a negative correlation between recognition and pay, meaning that if I want recognition, I really, really want you to recognize me, not to pay me for it. And the problem with banking, as I see it, is that pay has become a symbol for something else. And those guys are all very, very competitive. So if you were asking them to fight about Smarties and made Smarties the currency, that would be the currency because that's the symbol. So we just have to take away the symbol from the bankers and provide them something else to compete about, and they'll be perfectly happy. Pay does matter in one respect. It really matters if it's not fair. And I just want to show you a little video in a moment about fair pay. So overcoming challenges, that's important. And being in tune with the values of your organization. Again, super important for many of us. I'm just having a slight problem with my screen here. Let me just see if I can... My screen is jumping around. So, being in tune with your organization's values is something that obviously matters to an enormous number of you, but I think that learning is the interesting thing that we've got here, and it doesn't surprise me at all. It's why you're on the call. So, thank you very much for taking part in that poll, and let's move forward. Fiona, I'm having trouble with my screen.
Have you lost your presentation?
I haven't lost my presentation, but let me just, could you take over?
I can.
And could you just...
actually, can you pass it to me, Jessica?
I can't because every time I move the cursor, it's attached to
okay, don't worry.
making the screen move.
I've got it now, don't worry.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
That's okay. Can you see that now?
Okay. The window is attached to my cursor, so every time I try and move my the cursor, it's moving the screen.
Try pressing escape.
Yep. Okay, there we go. Got it.
Does that help?
Yep, that's helped.
Okay. Do you want to pass it back to you?
Yep, go on. I'll be a devil. Thank you. So, here's what we know about culture. These are the things that matter particularly in culture. So I've mentioned control. We've talked about a little bit about the values of your workplace because that makes you feel you fit. It particularly makes you feel you fit. If you don't like the values of your workplace, you always feel like a fish out of water. Fairness is hugely important. We seem to be hardwired for being fair and for recognizing what's fair and not fair. Just want to move forward and finding a struggle moving forward in my presentation. Fiona. Hello?
Can you just pass it back again, Jess?
Yep.
Thank you.
you take control because I can't move forward.
That's
okay, so what we want to do now...
I'm going to take control now because she's going to show the video for you.
So I want to show you this little video about some capuchin monkeys. And just while the video is getting set up, I hope you've got your speakers on. But this video shows capuchin monkeys who are being rewarded for doing some work. And this is Franceval, who's a well-known guy who works with these little monkeys. So if we could play the video, that would be great. And this is part of a TED Talk if you want to go and look for it. I'm happy to send you the link afterwards. So here he is explaining what he actually did and talking about the importance of fairness. For those of you who haven't got any sound, don't worry, the main thing's coming in a minute. So just explain that monkeys are being given either cucumber or grapes. And grapes are obviously the preferred currency. So the point of that video is, again, this isn't about control. It's not actually being fair. It's perceptions of fair and an understanding of why things are unfair if they have to be, because it matters so much to us in order to put our best effort in. So it's an explanation. If you are a leader or a manager, you better start explaining why things are going on if there is a perception of lack of fairness. So I realise that I've got a few more minutes left, and what I think I'm going to do is just go forward one or two more slides. So if you could click into the next slide, Fiona, that would be great, and talk about a job, a career, and a calling. And this will be the last slide that I show, and then I'll take questions. A job we do for money, a career we do for money and status, and a calling we do because we love it. And we know that in our data, people's sense of calling, of doing something worthwhile, has really dropped off, especially in the last 2 years. So the question is, how then do you get it back again, this sense of calling? And if you're a leader or manager, one of the things that you can do is to help people get what they love to do. So get them to make a list of all the tasks they do, or the relationships that they have, or the projects they have, and get them to rank order the list in terms of the time, effort, and energy they spend doing those things. And then get them to re-rank those lists in terms of how they would actually like that to be. And if you're doing this in a team, what you can ask people to do is to leave those post-it notes on the wall and then run a kind of supermarket, so you could exchange some things. So I found out, for example, that one of my colleagues absolutely loves diary work, and I can't stand organising my diary. She loves organising people getting together. And so I took some of her creative work off her in exchange for her helping with my diary. I call that a fantastic win. And she was really pleased to have me take some of the things off her table that she was struggling with. So that helped her gain more of a sense of calling and less of a sense of career. So a job you do for money, a career you do for money and status, and a calling you do because you absolutely love it. And it's getting people to realize how they do that for themselves. Because again, what you're doing is asking them to regain some sense of control in what they're doing and offering that back to them. So I think I'm going to end there. If we could just skip forward, this is how we use it in teams and how we use it in organizations, and go back one slide, the very last slide. I've got a white paper on Gen Y, if anybody would like to have it. and I have got 3 books to give away. So the first 3 emails that ping into my email box, you've got my email address right there. I'm absolutely delighted to mail you one of my books. And do feel free to connect on LinkedIn, and I'm happy 9 to 5, happy 925 if you find me on Twitter. So meanwhile, let me take your questions. Any more questions or comments? And thank you for listening.
Okay, I've got very quick for you to answer. Stuart was just asking who the speaker was in the video.
He's called Dewaal, Dewaal, and if you go to TED.com and look for him, you'll find his whole talk.
Great. Roger asked one a little bit earlier. It depends on the emphasis of what your presentation is about, but he was saying that the emphasis of your presentation so far had been on the measurement of happiness with far less emphasis on what to do about it. I assume that sort of he was asking if there's going to be any guidance on how to address our areas of unhappiness, which is quite a big subject really, isn't it? I assume.
I've just been sharing with you a few of the key tools that I know that work. So those, how to address it, some of those key tools that I've talked about in the sense of make sure that you listen to people, make sure that you really maximise a sense of control, explain what's fair, and how you're trying to build fairness into things, or achieve that for yourself or work with others. That you're optimizing your personal mindset as you go into things. But in my book, there's a whole bunch of tools. We have got, and I know this is not going to be an answer, and some of you are going to see this as a shameless plug, but we have got about 60 iTools that we call them iTools, of things that you can do to make it better, and to either work for yourself or with a team, and that's part of some of the work that we license. So I'm sorry that I have had not enough time to explain, but I think because we talk about assess, analyse and act, the assessment has to come first so you know what you're trying to do, because happiness by itself is such an enormous topic.
Okay, moving on, I've got a question from Hector, who was just asking, he was essentially saying he personally likes the term calling. How can you compare it with the term vocation?
Gosh, that's a question I've never thought about. Vocare in Latin actually means call. One of my sad pasts is I'm actually a classicist as well as a psychologist, so the root of the word is the same. So vocation typically in the UK means something like doctor, nurse, teacher, those kind of things. But I disagree that you can only have that in those kind of jobs. I met a woman who at Heathrow told me she drew herself up very proudly and said that when she was going through security, that she absolutely loved her job because she was helping keep Britain safe. And I thought, shame on me, because I'd had some kind of negative attitude towards her doing her job. You can have a calling, it's absolutely regardless of hierarchy, and I met a CEO of an investment bank who definitely only had a job. He was absolutely doing it for the money.
Okay, we've got a question from Lenka, which is going back to when we were talking about people who are off sick, and she's wondering what you meant by being ill. You also mean people who are depressed and on antidepressants?
Yeah, absolutely. I do.
Okay. Any more coming through? If you use the Q&A panel to send your questions through rather than the chat facility, that would be good. We've got another couple of minutes if anybody else has any more questions. Just while you're thinking about those, I'm just going to move on and just give you details about our session, which will be on the 27th of February. And is covering managing conflict at work with Dave Barrett, who's not related to Jane Barrett, we should probably point out. So if any of you are actually interested in attending that session, obviously you can register on the Open University website as you did for this session, and it would be great to see you there. I don't know what's happened to that slide, it's gone all over the place for some reason. So yes, if you've got any more questions, if you want to send them. Otherwise, I think we have nearly finished.
Oh, can I just say one more thing, please?
You can.
If you want to know what to do about this stuff, if you go in and want to self-assess and have a full report, as I said, please just send me an email, and I'm happy to do that. And there's a lot of self-help stuff at the bottom of the reports, things to do, questions to answer, stuff to think about. Because I think the first thing it always starts with is, what am I trying to address here? What am I trying to solve? And who does it serve in trying to solve it? So there's two additional questions for you. So I'm sorry I haven't given you more particular tools. It does also depend on, you're doing this for yourself or you're doing it for others as a leader, as a manager. So thank you very much again, and please do feel free to get in touch with me.
Yes, everybody. And just to remind you that we will send a copy of the slide to the Open University. So if anybody wants a copy, they can send those on to you. Also, there will be a recording of the session as well. So if any of you re-listen to any particular points, you can do that. And again, that will be on the university website once it's available. So I'd just like to thank you all for attending. Thank Jess for a great presentation. Hope you all found it really useful. We hope to see you at one of our future sessions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.